G'day mate, 40 here. So there's a terrific W.B. Yeats poem, The Second Coming, among the most quoted poems of all time, 20th century poem, and contains the immortal lines, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." So I want to reframe that, reinterpret the line, "the best lack all conviction," to the best lack all conviction when they don't know what they're talking about. Right? So if you don't know something, you should say, "I don't know." If you haven't read a book, then you shouldn't proclaim about the book. If you haven't seen a movie, probably shouldn't pass judgment on the movie. If you don't know much about voter fraud, you should probably be fairly circumspect. What do you think of women feeling better after taking testosterone? I suspect it probably gives them some confidence. So, yeah, if women take testosterone, it makes them feel better. I don't feel threatened by it. It doesn't bother me. Like, women with higher levels of testosterone tend to be more sexual. They tend to be more aggressive. They tend to have more confidence, just as men who take testosterone tend to be more sexually charged, more aggressive, they have more confidence. So, the best lack all conviction, I want to interpret that. Best lack all conviction when they don't know what they're talking about. If you don't know about hidden boxes of ballots, don't opine. Right. So, okay. There's some video of Georgia vote counting workers uncovering boxes of ballots when they supposedly were done with the count, when supposedly there was a water main that broke, and then it turns out that the water main breaking, delaying the vote count, didn't that turn out to be bogus? Okay, so I don't know the significance of that video about the uncovering of boxes of ballots when they weren't supposed to be counted. And Ricardo says if you didn't watch the hearing, you don't have the context to understand the video. So I don't have an opinion on the video. I don't. It seems to be getting an awful lot of traction, and I'm not aware of any debunking of the video and saying, "Oh, this is perfectly innocent. This happens all the time. Nothing to see here." Not aware of that. So far in the month since the election, most of the voter fraud claims that have been pushed in a viral fashion, they've then received mainstream media treatment and rebuttal. Now, I'm not aware of this one receiving that yet, so I find that interesting. Normally, the New York Times, Washington Post, Luke invests time in reading liberal debunks of electoral fraud but couldn't be bothered to watch the hearing. So, if there was there a mainstream media debunking of this viral video? I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any coverage of it in the LA Times, the New York Times, or the Washington Post. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that, because when these stories get enough traction in the dissident sphere, eventually they get mainstream media coverage. So I'll be curious. So I don't know the significance of the video. No, I don't have 1980s level of trust. Luke has 1980s level of trust in the New York Times and the Washington Post. And if supposedly Luke's opinion is if the New York Times doesn't cover it, it doesn't exist. Do you really believe that, or are you just trying to get a rise out of me? Because you know that there are many, many things I believe which go completely against what the New York Times says is true. So I understand that your approach to conversation is just a vent. And Ricardo has a very, very black approach to rhetoric. Like Ricardo speaks very much like a black preacher. So words aren't things to be used carefully. Words are things to be used to express feelings and emotional states. I've never said that I trust the New York Times, Washington Post the most. I said that the New York Times is the best newspaper of which I'm aware. Now, there are dozens of things I believe that contradict what the New York Times says. But that's a good example. If there's a dissonant idea or news story like this Georgia ballot story, then I do want to hear what the New York Times, the Washington Post says, and I don't necessarily side with the New York Times and Washington Post, but I want to hear their rejoinder, right? When I hear a dissonant idea, I want to hear the rejoinder. When I hear a right-wing idea, I want to hear the rejoinder. And then if the rejoinder is weak, that's significant. If I can poke holes in the rejoinder, but I like to hear competing arguments and then make up my mind. So the best lack all conviction, meaning we don't proclaim with certainty things that we don't know anything about. Right? I'm thinking of someone I know, an academic who would feel quite comfortable publicly stating opinions on books he hadn't read, and then his career flamed out, and it's no surprise because it's so soul crushing. Like if you start passing opinions on books you haven't read, if you start passionately going to the barricades on matters that you don't know anything about, then it's going to produce a hollow feeling, and you're going to lose all sense of good judgment. So if you feel comfortable proclaiming on things you don't know, what's going to happen is it'll create a hollow feeling inside, and then you're not going to feel comfortable standing up for things that you do know, because you no longer trust yourself. You realize that you'll say anything to get rid of emotional pain, or to vent, or to express your distress about reality. You know how off the hook you'll be in the things that you'll say in response to stress. And so you no longer trust yourself to stand up on matters where you do know something. How far am I from West Hollywood? I think I'm like 2 miles. So do you trust yourself? It should be, do you trust yourself in what areas, right? Everybody should have things where they trust themselves, and they should have areas of life where they don't trust themselves. Right? None of us are, 100% trustworthy in every aspect of life. So I notice in the month since the election, there have been all these bogus voter fraud claims raised, and then some which, to the best of my knowledge, have not been debunked. But if you're like one of those guys who was sharing that J.B. Shirk article on the Federalist, 5 reasons to be suspicious of Joe Biden's electoral victory, I mean, that was such a piece of junk. Like, if you were sharing that, aren't you embarrassed? Aren't you embarrassed by what a piece of junk you were sharing? Or much of the analysis by Patrick Basham of the so-called Democracy Institute, turned out to be so bogus upon examination. if you have been sharing, bogus information about voter fraud, then you should be more circumspect now that things that you've shared have been refuted so many times, right? Like, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. If you keep buying into these bogus allegations, and Joseph Cotter made that point that people love Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell, like these attorneys on fighting the steal, that people love them, but the more substantial cases to be made about voter fraud, they don't get nearly as much attention or enthusiasm. So I think like the visceral emotional appeal of what Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell puts out there, it meets people's visceral emotional needs much more than the thoughtful cases about voter fraud, which are being mounted, which are much more circumspect. Say, like a Robert Barnes, he seems to be much more circumspect and thoughtful and rational, and seems to be making a better case. So, for example, the best case of which I'm aware about voter fraud in the 2020 election is that normally with mail-in ballots, the error rate that invalidates the mail-in ballot is something like 1 to 3%, and now this time around the invalidation rate has been something like 0.1%. So that seems curious. Now, I did notice like the bogus way that much of the voter fraud discussion is being carried out in the alternative media is, I'm just raising questions, bro. And it's fine to raise questions, but it's being used as a rhetorical statement. It's like, I don't have strong evidence, but I'm just raising questions, right? There's a place for raising questions, but as a rhetorical strategy, it just seems weird. Yes, it seems really weird to kick out observers or to not allow observers proper access. That seems to me a legitimate critique of election procedures. So there are substantial points. Luke can't opine. He doesn't know enough if it wasn't in those 2 books he read. If I think I have something to add on a topic, then I will opine. But say the Georgia video, the Georgia hearings, I didn't watch the hearings. I don't understand the significance of the video, and I haven't seen any debunkings of the video yet. The whole process seems crooked to me. Is it true that most counters are Democrats? I'm not sure it's true that most counters are Democrats. America is a federal system. With a federal system, you're not going to get the uniform results that you'll get with a unitary system. So, do you like federalism? If you like federalism, then you have to make peace with different counties, let alone different cities and different states, having different methods for counting votes. So maybe you like federalism in general, but you don't want federalism with regard to the voting process. So that's what Australia has. Australia is a federal system, but it has uniform, unitary voting procedures. So something like the 2020 election and all the delays and all the mess of the 2020 election with the voting count would not happen in Australia because it has one unitary voting system, one federal agency runs it. Now, in America, you have different counties often count votes in different ways. So that's the mess. That's the price to pay for having a federal system when it comes to vote counting. Do you really want that? Doesn't seem like such a great idea. seems like we'd be better served by something like Australia, where they have one unitary system, a federal system. Why is asking common sense questions about breaches of electoral process evidence of conspiratorial thinking? I don't think it is. I don't think asking questions about the voting process is evidence of conspiratorial thinking. Seems like legitimate inquiry and good citizenship to me. But if you then build on that to, okay, there's these 7 questions that I don't have answers to about the voting process, therefore the vote was fixed. Okay, that seems to me a bridge too far. So I notice a lot of people who believe in voter fraud also believe that COVID-19 is a hoax. So again, this is like the worst, have passionate intensity. Like, how can you call COVID-19 a hoax? Now, I guess in the same way that parts of the distant right will call the Holocaust a hoax, and they don't really mean it in the sense of body counts. They mean it in the sense that this has been held up as the event of all history through the prism through which we must understand, all of human events. It is the great moral test. It is the test above all tests. And so it seems clear that COVID-19 is about 10 times more deadly than the regular flu. Now, is supporting lockdowns discrediting? Discrediting of what? Now, for example, it seems at this point that closing outdoor playgrounds is not helpful. Closing the beach, closing hiking trails. So California has become much more sophisticated in its lockdown approach. For example, if you need to make a podcast, you're allowed to get out there. That seems appropriate because making podcasts and live streams is just vital for the health of our democracy. So it seems like cities, states have become more sophisticated with the way they're doing lockdowns. But I just don't think you can call COVID a hoax when over 1 million people have died from it. Now, it does seem that more people in the United States anyway, over age 75, have died from it than all other ages put together around the world. So it's the people who haven't read books about respiratory diseases, who haven't reviewed peer-reviewed studies on respiratory diseases, who come out with statements like COVID is a hoax. Now, people who say COVID is a hoax, you can't take them literally. Well, you can, but I don't think that's the right approach. What they're expressing is that the lockdown is overdone, that the hysteria is overdone, that the reaction is overly intense, that the talking heads, the experts, the ones we're supposed to believe, that frequently contradict themselves. They often don't know as much as they pretend to know. And so I think it's a reaction to that overly reverential treatment that the media gives to Dr. Fauci and company. So often it's helpful to understand what people are saying behind the literal words. So for those saying COVID is a hoax, on the face of it, it seems like a ridiculous statement, just like those people who are saying Holocaust is a hoax. Face of it, totally ridiculous statement. But go underneath it, what are they really saying? They're protesting the sacralization of certain perspectives on a difficult issue. All right, let me have a look at the chat. All right. Lockdowns are not only for the average Joe, not for the overlords. Well, overlords are going to have more intelligence, are going to make better choices, and so dumber people need more direction. Look, how can men compete if more women start taking testosterone? Because where do you think you're not going to be able to compete if more women take testosterone? Like, in what areas of life do you think? Okay, reports of a man armed with wood hitting passer-by about a mile away. So I'm going to keep my eye out for a man with wood hitting passers-by about a mile away. So where do you think men won't be able to compete if women take testosterone? 1 million people have died. Yeah, in the world, approximately. There are way too many irregularities for there to be nothing shady happening. I don't think Wood or Power would be putting themselves out there if there wasn't a huge amount of evidence. Well, I think they would be putting themselves out there possibly if there wasn't a huge amount of evidence, because people with personalities like mine enjoy being center of attention. Yeah, so a lot of the talk about people being turned into lampshades and soap, and that turned out to be bogus. Supporting the lockdown is discrediting. Luke is looking fierce today walking around Los Angeles. COVID being a hoax simply means that it's not nearly as deadly as the media claims it is. Yes. So that makes sense. And when people call the Holocaust a hoax, it's not saying that 6 million people didn't die if the person saying it's high IQ. They're saying that this is not the most significant event in human history to which everything must be referenced. Ricardo says Atlanta precincts broke state laws. Well, guess what? Everybody breaks state laws. So question is how significant it is. Like, if you move around, you're probably breaking state laws every day because there are so many laws. Electoral rules are managed on a state level. They're also managed at times on a county level as well as a state level. Most counters in blue districts are Democrats. Yes, most everything in America are Democrats because the entire intelligentsia is Democrat. I think that's an overstatement. That definitely the Democrats are the dominant elites. Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell are preparing the backup plan to Trump losing the legal battle. You have thought of calling them Luke streams. I was early on in doubting Patrick Basham. His association with Joseph Cotto is a big flag. How do you feel as you walk with care? I trust my judgment in reading the credibility of people. Yeah, I think Ricardo often has really good judgment in his reading of people. How do I like DLive? It's been fine. So I turned down the bit rate from 3,500 to 3,000. So maybe the streams will start glitching on people. I might even turn down the bit rate to 2,500. The best newspaper that exists, low bar. Really? Is that a low bar? There are thousands of newspapers in the world. Luke invested time in reading liberal debunks of electoral fraud but couldn't be bothered to watch the hearing. Yeah, watching a hearing is really bad use of time, right? So if there are highlights in the hearing, some enterprising journalists will highlight them and place them in context. Luke, we are men. How are we going to live if women humiliate us like stronger men? They're not going to humiliate you even if they take some testosterone. If you haven't read neoliberal propaganda about electoral fraud, then you don't know anything about it. Well, if you haven't done some study into the matter with the people who devoted their adult life and produced peer-reviewed publications, then you probably don't know much about the topic. Washington Post, New York Times, Ricardo is great content. Okay. The Great Reset is the end game. The Great Reset doesn't mean anything. The Great Reset, that simply refers to every group, every political orientation, every political party tries to use crises to move things in the direction that they want to go in anyway. So people on the right who favor immigration restriction will use COVID-19 as a way to reset our immigration policy and to have stronger borders. People who want more protectionist trade policy will try to use COVID-19 as a way to reset our trade policy. So there's nothing inherently sinister about a great reset. It's just that's the way the world works. Everybody tries to take advantage of crises to push forward what they believe in. The systemic corruption of our institutions discredits everything they put out. There are scientists who dedicated their careers to blaming humans for climate change. Okay, so America still has the world's top universities. I just don't think you can dismiss all universities because there are some shoddy professors, shoddy scientists operating there. Now, what about social media's flagging of COVID skeptical content? Does that raise flags? Yeah, it raises flags. Like, why should we not get to question the so-called experts when they often contradict themselves within a month or two? That's why I like hearing dissident ideas, and then I like hearing rejoinders to those ideas. So when I hear an argument and a counter-argument, then it helps clarify my thinking. The conservative bailout from elite institutions will further the insidious dominance of Asians and set conservatives even further back. Well, there are plenty of conservatives in academic institutions, but they're generally not in the humanities or the social sciences. They're in the natural sciences and the hard sciences. Okay, let's have a look. Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood have been around for decades. I knew of Lynn Wood previously, but not Powell. They didn't just one day decide to be the center of attention. No, Sidney Powell has been trying to be the center of attention for many years. Any perspective that depends on censorship is lacking and inherently is suspect and inherently lacking. Well, I just know that the way I prefer to think and mull over an idea is to hear different perspectives. And so if one side is consistently silenced and censored, then it does make it more difficult to get clarity on important issues, and it does make you wonder, like, what are they hiding? So I prefer to get dissident ideas, mainstream media rejoinders, and then weigh them up. And then feel free to change my mind, right? Because I want to have an accurate sense of my own importance. You know, I'm a bloke who live streams, who's been blogging for 22 years. I don't have to take myself too seriously. And so it's much easier for me to just change my mind when I get new information. Now, Ricardo says I always like to get Satan's side of things before I make up my mind. So you can see why, taking the faith-based approach to reality makes life a lot easier, because then you get definitive good and evil, right? And it gives you a framework for dismissing those who oppose you as evil, and then you don't have to worry about their perspectives. So that frees up your time. It enables you to concentrate your emotions and your efforts in a much more clear direction, and to join forces with others who share your faith-based orientation, and life can become much more intense and meaningful because you believe that you are on God's side. You're on the forces of light fighting against the forces of darkness. So I get why that perspective is so incredibly appealing. But generally speaking, on Twitter, and I think I mainly follow distant right accounts, though I started unfollowing people like J5 Killer and a lot of that crowd over the past week. But what I generally notice on my Twitter is the more intense the exclamations, the more ignorance is behind them. So what does it mean that the best lack all conviction? So in the context of this live stream, it means that if they don't know something, they say that. If they don't know much, they say that. If they just know a moderate amount, they say that. They put it into context. Luke has overdosed on Cotto pills. How on earth have I overdosed on Cotto pills? I don't follow Joseph Cotto on Twitter. Too many self-promoting tweets. But I don't know how am I overdosing. I don't even know what a Cotto pill is. I would say that I'm a big fan of Paul Gottfried, and I'm a big fan of the Joseph Cotto channel. I enjoy many of the discussions he has, and I think that I've done many of my best streams with Joseph Cotto over the past year. So I appreciate Cotto's relentless approach to live streaming, continually coming up with interesting guests and giving them space to finish their answers without interruption. So I think Joseph Cotto does a lot of good work. Not exactly sure what Cotto pills have I taken. All right, look, we need more palm trees on your walk. If women are as fierce as men, how are we supposed to romance them or assert ourselves to oppose them? This is the end of... No, it's not the end of men. A woman takes some testosterone, it's not going to transform her into a man. You could take some estrogen, it's not going to transform you into a woman. It'll make some minor modifications, some minor temporary modifications. But just, I think of all the things to worry about or be concerned about. And I do think that we're all pretty much angrier, more fearful, more insecure, more vulnerable than we believe. And we live in a more unsafe world around us than we rationally realize most of the time. But women taking testosterone supplements, I don't think is anything we need to worry about. Yeah, the worst are filled with passionate intensity. So yeah, you do see this on social media. I think you have to be careful who you follow on social media because it really does produce an emotional contagion and an echo chamber if you just follow people who you agree with, and it just kind of ramps up the rage. So if Joseph Biden is sworn in as president January 20th, what's that going to do to you, right? For all the people who are so sure that Biden's never going to be president, and they've been following all these Twitter accounts saying Biden will never be president and trust the plan. If I cannot be better than women, how am I supposed to compete? Their hypergamy will be even worse if they start taking testosterone en masse. Compete on your own excellence. It's not a threat. If women start taking testosterone en masse or make a small difference, they won't start to rule men. There has never been a matriarchal society. There's never been a society run or ruled by women. This is not something worth worrying about. Men are predisposed to hierarchy. Yeah, looks like Luke is on his way to perform brain surgery in the hospital. Yeah, I read some peer-reviewed books on brain surgery, some studies, and I watched some academic videos on brain surgery, and so I'm just assisting in the brain surgery. I have no excellence outside of my masculine physical appearance. I am stupid, unconscientious because of my brain chemistry. I don't buy that. So you need to tap into a life that works and then build on that. So if you can have a sense of your own limitations, right? Okay, so you're saying you can't trust yourself due to your brain chemistry. The best may simply realize that their conviction is too high-Q, complex, and nuanced to be shared with dummies. Good point, Colin. So if you can just build on, okay, I got some brain chemistry problems. Okay, in this area of life, I can't really trust myself. In that area of life, I can't fully trust myself. But in these areas of life, I do tend to make good decisions. So it helps to get a sense of things that you don't know, that you haven't been seeing, and have people in your life whose feedback you trust, and then turn to God, your higher power, the universe, eternal principles of truth, justice, whatever does it for you, Judaism, some sacred text, and build from that. Men must have relationships to women that black boxes have to white boxes. I would never let a white boy beat me. Well, guess what? Every man in a relationship with a woman is at times going to be in a position where she could kill him. Right? There's no perfectly safe place. You can never build a world that's perfectly safe. You can never build a relationship where you 100% of the time have the whip hand, where you are always stronger. Like even the strongest man can get incredibly sick, so that his woman at times will be stronger than him. So how can anything be right if women take testosterone? We must always be greater than the women in our lives. Your greatness does not depend upon your testosterone levels. Women have certain inherent spheres of life where they tend to do a lot better than men. Women taking testosterone is no threat to you. But it's a lot easier to obsess about these abstract issues than to actually build your own life, and to take steps to get emotionally sober, to build skills. Greatness depended on T levels. How would Obama become president? Exactly. What do you mean our greatness has no relationship to our testosterone? This is borderline feminist talking point. Okay, first of all, I didn't say it had no relationship. I said it's not the be-all and end-all. And there are a lot of spheres of life where testosterone does not serve you, right? Testosterone makes you more prone to outbursts, to violence, to unnecessary aggression, right? There are spheres of life where testosterone helps. It can help you build up muscles. It can help you with a more positive attitude. It can give you a little more assertiveness. But there are also ways that higher testosterone levels harm you. So, generally speaking, higher testosterone men marry. They marry more often than lower testosterone men. But when they get married and they have kids, their testosterone levels plunge, because high testosterone doesn't usually serve you. Aggression is good because you can rid yourself of those who are dumber than you and less wise than you by being aggressive. That's a world of delusion. You'll never be able to rid yourself of everyone who is inferior to you. Right? You can't control other people. You can't control the world. So when you high testosterone male, typical high testosterone male, he marries, he has kids, his testosterone levels plunge. They don't serve him anymore. Like, I have days where I have zero lust. I spend zero time lusting. So high testosterone levels would not serve me right now, in the sense of spending more time lusting and planning how can I go after women, like we're in a COVID lockdown. There are all sorts of ways that it would just serve as a distraction right now. why do low testosterone level men not get why do low testosterone level men not get married? Well, high testosterone men tend to be more successful in life. So they tend to be more assertive. So obviously there are ways that testosterone serves you. Whoa, I did not mean to make this did not mean to make that so focused on me. Okay. So there are certain things in life where high testosterone serves you, and there are other things in life where it doesn't. So not all of life is built around your T-scores. And your life, the meaning of your life, the worth of your life, can't be reduced just to whether or not you're in a relationship, or whether or not you have a job, or whether or not you're a high earner. Aren't unnecessary walks now banned in California? Bro, there's an exception for podcasting. Didn't you see that? I mean, Mayor Garcetti and I mean maybe even California's governor said there are exceptions for legitimate journalistic and podcasting activities. So this is essential for our state's health, man. Come on, man, cut out the malarkey. Okay. Testosterone injections tend to dramatically reduce male fertility and overall sperm count. Yeah, they do. So there are downside to testosterone injections. If you have low testosterone, you must feel immense shame and inferiority. Why? 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 Why must you feel immense shame and inferiority? Life does not boil down to just how you score in one thing. Life does not boil down to how you score with your testosterone levels or your thyroid levels or your GPA or your SAT or your IQ or whether or not you're in a relationship, whether or not you have a job, whether or not your mother loves you, whether or not you're getting a high viewership on YouTube, whether or not your boss adores you. There's not one factor to which you can boil down all of life. Now, lots of for rent signs, but I don't think rent levels are overall going down in West LA. Still believe that more higher educated, high skilled people are moving into California than moving out. But I think it was Camus who said, "What, by such narrow ways? People think there are such narrow ways to happiness or to a meaningful life. That it all that it all just boils down to testosterone levels or income levels. Come on, man, cut the malarkey. There are many ways to have a good life. One way is to get married and have 12 kids. Another way is to be a single man and climb every major peak in the world. Another way is to join the armed forces. Another way is to devote yourself to coding. There are many ways to lead a good life. This doesn't boil down to testosterone levels. Okay, I had so much wisdom to share with you, and it's eluding me. So give me a prompt. Let me go off on a tirade. Had a beautiful day here in Southern California. It's about 70 degrees, sunny. Air quality is moderate. Yes. It's a lot easier to get passionate about something if you don't know much. If you don't know the rejoinders to your position, if you don't struggle with people who challenge you, if you're unaware of previous work. What does Judaism say about forgiving sinners? I am attracted to Christ despite ethnic Judaism because of ultimate forgiveness for sinners. Okay. So, there are many teachings about forgiveness in Judaism, but the basic one is that, let's say I steal $5,000 from Ricardo. Now, according to Judaism, I can't even show up to God to get forgiveness for stealing $5,000 from Ricardo until I not just ask for forgiveness from Ricardo, but I repair that damage. So I repay Ricardo in full, I repair the damage, I heal that breach with Ricardo. And then, when I have made amends with Ricardo, then I can show up to God and get God's forgiveness. But I can't even ask God for forgiveness. Yes, Ricardo is a goy. Now, from a Christian perspective, you can just go straight to God, right? If I were a Christian and I stole $5,000 from Ricardo, I could go straight to God and say, God, please forgive me. I shouldn't have stolen $5,000 from my friend. And I feel really bad about this. I humble myself before you. And then all Christian clergy would tell you also to seek out Ricardo and to make it right. But the order is different. In Judaism, the order when you harm other people is that you need to go to them and make things right with them. And then you can show up to God. So, in a sense, Judaism is more humanistic. It's God-centered Judaism. But if you harm people, you have to go straight to people. While in Christianity, there's kind of a universal forgiveness for those who accept Christ. How can any man tolerate being dominated and humiliated by women with high testosterone? Bro, you would rather get obsessed by something that has virtually no meaning or purpose. Yeah, you want to get obsessed with something that has no meaning or purpose, women taking testosterone. And I get why, because it distracts you from painful feelings. So, tell me about your self-image. Like, do you see yourself as a good person? Then you probably want to deny all feelings and evidence that you might not be a good person. Like, what's your self-image? Is your self-image that you're an honest person? Then you probably want to ignore all feelings and evidence that you're not honest. And so the more you live in denial, the more you need to distract yourself from reality and get obsessed with things that have absolutely no meaning to your life. Yeah, no amount of estrogen or testosterone will cause a woman to respect you. Okay, I see myself as a loser and a dilettante. Okay, as a dilettante. Okay, so what if you had feelings or evidence that what's the opposite of dilettante? That there were some things that you were very serious about, that you believed in very intensely and passionately. So the dilettante thing is probably just a pose to save you from feelings of inadequacy, save you from feelings of loss. And so that other people can't hurt you, you'll just say, well, I'm a dilettante. But I love this exercise where we write out our self-image. And then, okay, I'll just do it with me. Okay, my self-image is that I am a good person. So, what would threaten that is evidence and emotions that I am a bad person. So, I just write about that. So I want to make my unconscious feelings conscious. I've noticed since I've been taking the John Sarno approach to back pain and many physical diseases that they're caused by unconscious rage, that we have certain conceptions of ourselves. Then when feelings and evidence comes up that contradicts our self-conception, we shunt it aside. And the brain assists by giving us physical problems so that we don't have to confront evidence and feelings that contradicts how we believe we are, our self-identity, our image of ourselves. So I'm writing out my image of myself and then exploring what's the opposite. So my image of myself is that I don't state I've read books when I haven't read them, right? So when I catch myself saying I've read a book when I've only read a part of a book, okay, I try to catch that out. When I catch myself starting to make proclamations about things I don't know anything about, I get embarrassed. Now, of course, I can't help but do that when I live stream as much as I do. So, oh man. Okay. Where's... Oh man, that's still way too tight. Okay, self-image, that I'm a hard worker. So then I can write about, okay, what's the evidence that, I'm a shoddy worker, irresponsible worker, lazy, so that I make things that contradict my self-image. I make them concrete and real. It's much better to have emotional pain than physical pain. I love this exercise. Okay, look, a lot of your talking points are anti-aggressive, but aggression is needed. Sign up with an endocrinologist and get your testosterone. Yes, aggression is needed. Assertiveness is needed. Aggression will often get you into trouble, but assertiveness is usually vital. Okay, I have a self-image that I'm someone with a lot of 12-step recovery. Okay, and then there's evidence that my recovery in various areas of my life is quite shaky. So by making the unconscious conscious, I can suffer the emotional pain rather than suffering the debilitating physical pain. So I've noticed that my digestion's been a lot better since I don't like that. Why is this so zoomed in? So what else is important to me? My self-image. My self-image is that I am a benefit to people around me. And so what would challenge my self-image is evidence that I am a net negative to people around me, that I'm a burden to people around me, that I'm unnecessary to people around me. How can I change this zoom? Doesn't look like I can. Okay. I think I've bloviated about enough, so I'm about to wind this up unless someone can provoke me. So I'm doing this exercise, trying to figure out what is my self-image so that I can then probe what would be oppose or threaten my self-image and get some clarity. Okay, so I have a self-image that I entertain people, and what would challenge my self-image is if I bore people. Okay, am I more Aussie or American? Well, 9 of my first 11 years were in Australia. So imprinting, stuff that's not fully conscious, probably has a lot of Australian influence. And I have, however, spent 40 years of my life in America. Yeah, Luke is outside looking for crack horse to save. So I spent 4 times as much of my life in America than Australia. But as you get older, you become more ethnocentric. So I certainly have phases where I become very homesick for Australia. And so I read a lot of books on Australia. I watch documentaries or movies or TV shows from Australia to get back in touch with that. Okay, take care.